Well, it came and went, it being the election, of course, but it feels like we still have a lot of unanswered questions. Here for a special edition of The Debrief is The Hill's editor-in-chief, Bob Cusack, and my rising co-host, Briahna Joy Gray. Good to see both of you. So Briahna and I have talked a lot about the election so far. What are your takeaways, Bob?
Well, listen, the polls were wrong, again. This time, maybe pollsters were trying to oversample Republicans, but this was supposed to be a red wave. It was not a red wave.
No.
The silver lining for Republicans is that as we film this, they could still win the House and the Senate, but they're going to have to run the table and win in Georgia to win the Senate.
Yeah.
And their House majority is going to be tiny. And how Kevin McCarthy governs that raucous caucus is going to be fascinating.
Yeah, talk to us a little bit more about how that dynamic, the narrow margin there, is going to impact the House.
Well, Pelosi had a very narrow margin, and she struggled to move controversial bills. And she's the best vote counter I've ever covered. Kevin McCarthy's always wanted to be Speaker, so it's a good problem for him to have. But it's a problem when you've got Taylor Greene, and you've got Chip Roy, and you've got Jim Jordan. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough.
It's funny to hear you say that because from the left perspective, we felt as though the Republicans tend to go in lockstep, vote for bills that are important, not hold up the agenda. And frankly, the left was hoping that progressives in Congress would use the narrow majority that we had there to hold up more than they did.
Yeah.
And you think that the Republicans are going to have more of an issue than even the Democrats had?
I think the issue to watch, Briahna, is the 87,000 IRS agents. Republicans, even before the election, were saying, we need to get rid of those 87,000 that were in the Inflation Reduction Act. Joe Biden's not going to go along with that. Democrats are not going to go along with that. And that could threaten a government shutdown. So they plan to use their leverage, and as the left did in the beginning, but then had to kind of cede to Manchin and Sinema in the Senate, which I know frustrated progressives. But I think these Republicans are going to be hard-charging, and I just think it's going to be difficult to control because whatever the margin is, he's going to only be able to lose 7 or 8 Republicans on big bills, and that's it.
Well, while we're still monitoring several races, it appears that Democrats were able to hold off the highly anticipated red wave, as we've been discussing. The GOP does appear to still have a path to take the Senate, obviously. So specifically with the Senate, what are we looking at now? We're looking at Nevada, right, and then a Georgia runoff. That's basically the path, unless Arizona does something unexpected in the next couple hours, I guess.
You're right. They've called Ron Johnson's race, so he won another narrow one. He's a survivor. He beat Feingold twice and narrowly won again. So they have to. The Democrats are likely to win Arizona. So let's assume that. Then Republicans have to win in Nevada, and they have to win a likely runoff in Georgia. So it could come down to Georgia again.
And so we'll be in the exact same situation we were 2 years ago. We will be in a deadlocked a Senate where the Georgia runoff matters, where if the Democrats win it, then we have a 50-50 Senate tie with Kamala Harris.
Right. This time, it's only one race, not 2, though.
How do you feel like that's going to play out? Do you think that having the runoff inures to the benefit of the Democrats? There are mixed views about how libertarian voters typically swing. Robbie, you were saying earlier that you think they're pretty evenly divided between Republicans, Democrats, and people who just will stay home. Right. And obviously we saw Warnock be able to pull it out in the stretch in the runoff last time around. What do you expect?
I give Warnock the edge, honestly, because I've talked to some Republicans who keep shaking their head at Herschel Walker that he's been a bad candidate. He's had bad headlines. There's going to be so much more attention over the next month if it goes to a runoff. And I also think, what are the stakes here? Well, it's a Supreme Court nomination, possibly, and that ties into abortion. And abortion clearly helped the Democrats.
Yeah, strangely in that race, not necessarily in the way that you would expect, with Walker having the accusations of having somewhat hypocritically, people argue, paid for abortions at the same time that he is the one that's holding himself up as the vanguard against there being broad, sweeping abortion policies in the United States of America. But it didn't take long. Obviously, now we're looking to 2024, and people are wondering, with an anticipated presidential announcement coming from Donald Trump next week, the former commander-in-chief is already alluding to a change of leadership in the Senate, touting Florida Republican Senator Rick Scott as a, quote, good replacement for Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. What do you think of that shakeup?
Well, I thought it was a fascinating move that Rick Scott over the weekend prior to the election wouldn't answer the question whether he would challenge Mitch McConnell. He just didn't answer that question. And Trump has privately lobbied Scott to do that. However, Scott had a rough night. He put out an agenda that was not popular even in the Republican Party that Democrats seized on. And also, they're probably not going to win the majority. I mean, you'd rather be the Democrats now than the Republicans as far as the Senate. So, and he told one of our reporters they could win up to 55 Senate seats. It's not aging well.
Whereas McConnell, everything he has said about the Senate outcome
very different
has been borne out. He said candidate quality matters. He said, I'm worried we're going to be hurt by some of these candidates in various places. And that is exactly what has happened.
And he also said it would be close. He said it could go either way.
Yeah.
He wasn't bold like Rick Scott. So Rick Scott's stock has taken a hit. I don't think Rick Scott is going to challenge McConnell. McConnell usually is nominated, and then he gets all the Republican votes. Is he going to get all the Republican votes for leader? I don't think so this time.
But what would even be the point to signaling opposition? It used to be, it would be to curry favor with Trump. But, I mean, that's a whole other circumstance. That doesn't look like, I mean, I guess that's support you want to have. Yeah. But Trump is going to be less popular than he was, even at least among kind of elite. Maybe it won't matter because base still loves him. But elite Republicans are pretty fed up with the Trump show as well.
Right. And the election deniers, generally speaking, at least the high-profile ones, didn't have a great night. I don't think people like looking backwards. And that's what McConnell and crew and the establishment have said. We got to look forward. Elections is about moving forward, but Trump can't let it go. He can't let go the 2020 election.
Look, we made a lot of criticisms of the idea that the Democrats had foregrounded the notion that democracy is on the ballot and kind of ran on that to the exclusion, people thought, of other issues like the economy that were ranked highly for voters. In light of how the Trump kind of big leg candidates performed, do you think that the Democrats knew something, that they knew something about voters that we maybe missed, and that kind of foregrounding these election democracy style issues was actually a good reminder that we don't want to return to those Trump policies of the past?
I don't. I think it gives the Democrats too much credit. I mean, but now, because they weren't running a lot of January 6th in ads. However, do I think the argument worked in the wake of these results? Yes, I think people are tired of looking backwards, and they're tired. And this is, January 6th was January 6th. It was a huge event, and Republicans downplaying it, including Trump. So I do think that the play of democracy is on the ballot worked. However, based upon right track, wrong track, the economy, which is the number one issue, and inflation, this was supposed to be a huge tsunami and ended up not being.
Well, on the economy, one question I've been asking some of our guests on Rising is what the Republican plan is for inflation, because there was a lot of criticism of Biden and of the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the other COVID-era spending as the cause of inflation. Whether or not you believe that, the Republicans have been a little thin on kind of prescriptions on how they're going to address the issue going forward, except for talking in somewhat muted tones about cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and some of these entitlement programs. Is that part of the issue?
I think so. They didn't have a lot of meat on the bones. Kevin McCarthy put out kind of a contract with America, but it was not a lot of meat there. Mitch McConnell decided, I'm not going to put out an agenda, and then he bashed Rick Scott's agenda and said, that's not our agenda. And I think that was a decent play based upon history. But in retrospect, maybe it didn't work because I think both parties struggle with inflation. Yeah. You can't just pass a bill yesterday and then it cuts inflation tomorrow. And Republicans have been saying they're going to cut spending forever. Did they do it in the Trump administration?
As well.
Right, exactly. And then the Fed has more of a role in inflation than Congress, but you have to talk about it. So they're going to try to cut spending, but that's going to be awfully difficult. And if you go anywhere near Medicare and Social Security, which Trump did not want to go, that's the third rail.
Yeah. We've also been very interested in whether a Republican House would chart a somewhat different course on Ukraine, with Kevin McCarthy saying that that's going to be kind of a focus, that the end to the blank check approach. But now we're looking at, I guess I would have to look at the individual House races and how various people are doing. It seems like maybe that Marjorie Taylor Greene really very anti-further Ukraine spending. They're not going to have as much of a large group as they might have had.
Right.
So maybe that is not going to be something that's going to be
I think that's a split between McCarthy and McConnell. McConnell is a big fan of aid for Ukraine because of Russia's involvement. So I think that's where McCarthy's going to need Democratic votes for Ukraine help. Because he's not going to have, the Republicans are not going to be able to do much even pass a budget, I think they're going to struggle with. And if you can't pass a budget, you can't cut government spending. So this is going to be a very challenging time for the House Republicans in 2023. And Kevin McCarthy is going to be at odds with McConnell at times, and at odds with the White House, of course, and at odds with Chuck Schumer. And who knows if Nancy Pelosi sticks around.
Yeah, that could be a fascinating opportunity for progressives in the House to reclaim some authority on the anti-war movement.
Yeah.
They've been heckled over the course of the last 2 weeks.
But it would require them to vote with Marjorie Taylor Greene, which they're going to get attacked for doing by the media.
But, look, there's an argument that the reason that the progressives didn't hold out on some of these issues before when they had the narrow majority is because ultimately it would have taken all of them and they would succumb to the pressure of Nancy Pelosi's whip. Now that they have potential unity with some Republicans in the majority, I mean, it could be a very interesting opportunity for progressives if they actually had a little bit of the backbone that a lot of progressive activists wish they had had.
And you've seen a little bit of this recently where permitting reform, where progressives and conservatives said, no, Joe Manchin, we don't like your bill for different reasons. And they joined up and killed it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Fascinating dynamic. Well, we will, of course, continue to monitor all of these results and the elections and what it means going forward. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll have more content right after this.